You noble diggers, all stand up now.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to my channel. Today we will be talking about hegemony, or an introduction to terms. Hegemony is a term that I use constantly on this channel. It is a metaphor, right? It is an analogy. As I've said before, hegemony comes from Alexander the Great's dad, Philip of Macedon. He beats a confederation of city-states in the Greek south with his kingdom of Macedon to the north, and declares, instead of conquering them, that they are independent and under his leadership, right? The world is a complex place. Understanding hegemony or things like it in a world numbered in billions of people, millions of tribes, hundreds of states, thousands and thousands of cities, all of it is too complex for most people's minds, right? Mine included, that I break it down into more digestible chunks, right? If I was to tell you, solve 12 times 19 in 10 seconds, you would struggle, no doubt. But if I told you 12 times 20 is 240, and you minus 12 from that, you get the answer to 12 times 19, which is 228. Thinking about geopolitics should be a lot the same, right? Thinking about how the world runs doesn't really work, right? There's too many people. So what you need to do is make it smaller, right? What the pre-1914 political cartoonists did that I really like is they made each nation state one person, right? Uncle Sam, Queen Victoria, right? The Kaiser, the Tsar, right? They had a French maid as the character of France. But anyways, once you start thinking about uh, politics generally as a small group matter, right? Maybe there's 10 or 15 of us, right? All of a sudden, your ability for politics goes through the roof, right? That small group politics is what humans thrive on. They understand it deeply. And so I'm going to go through the history of hegemony, right? And I want to talk about what was the impetus for this idea, right? The idea comes from a meme that goes something like, Babylon conquers Babylon, right? It is a perversion of a good academic idea to an anti-Semitic theory, right? And it's to imply that there is some kind of secret cabal that is constantly leading these nation states into wars and collapse, right? Again, we're not doing more anti-Semitism stuff, but that doesn't exist. It doesn't happen.
No, Dad, they were actually the good guys of World War II, so to speak. They were based and red-pilled. You still think there was war?
Babylon wages war on Babylon. Babylon vanquishes the evil of Babylon. Babylon falls and Babylon rises. The wars are not me, but the genocide of your people are. How they massacre you like cattle. How God leaps for your misguided souls death. Their merchants did trade. Their cross. So blinded by the serpent's propaganda. Where did their scientists go? You question where the bodies went, but where did Eiffel Towers?
But anyways, we're going to go through the history of hegemony, right? How it kind of arises out of prehistory, what it's useful for, and what its limits are, and then what we can learn today from that, right? So, like all peoples from prehistory, the first cities were matrilineal, right? They were uh, deterministic. They were interested in fate. They were the divine feminine personified, right? All of the ancient languages don't even have the term I in it. There is walking, there is running, right? There is breathing. This linguistic reference and deference to fate, right, creates a matrilineal kind of society, one more devoted to peace and craftsmanship. Conquest and slavery are at the bottom of the desires of a society like this. Not to say that there isn't these things, but that they are not devoted to these things, right? And so near the southern tip of Iraq, near the ocean, the Sumerian city-states coalesced, coagulated around super fertile places, right? Oases that attracted gazelle and all sorts of animals that could be eaten for food, right? And not to mention easily achieved agriculture, right? That you could drop some seeds on the ground and it's so fertile with so much dung and mud and river silt that it's going to grow, right? And so that's where the first cities built. But the cities itself, like fractal mathematics, right? Like a river delta or a flash flood pouring over a sand plain. The geometry of politics, right? The probabilities of politics lead then to a patriarchal system taking over, right? That once you are organized in the thousands, that violence and war become the existential necessity beyond all others, right? And therefore patriarchal organization has the advantage. And all states quickly become patriarchal. But these patriarchal states are bound, right? Much by the same rules as the old chimps are, right? If you are a leader of chimps, you are not the strongest chimp. You are not the biggest chimp. You are the best leader, right? You have to be big and strong. You have to be tough, right? But you also have to be charismatic. You also have to have friends, right? It's about the decorum, the personability that you bring to it, right? You cannot rule without the assent of the governed in a tribe of 20, right? Uh, which is very analogous to today's geopolitical position, right? America wants to rule like a tyrant, like Chief Chimp, right? And they're only a big chimp, right? China's a bigger chimp, but they have friends, right? They have historical ties. They have a established way of doing things that everyone kind of agrees on. But as they throw away, the old order, they'll find that the response to a chimp who turns to a tyrant is to beat him to death and eat him, right? That's what they do in the chimp world. If one chimp becomes too tyrannical, they kill him and they eat him, his family. And that's what the Allies are going to do to America if they continue down this path, right? The Americans bribed their way into world hegemony. Speaking of world hegemony, after the Sumerians, we go to Babylon, right? And Babylon is that first patriarchal state. And then to Assyria, who is another Semitic people to the north, right? The Assyrians and the Semitic people are the natural hegemons of the world. That's where it is, right? That's where it started. That's where you can rule the largest breadth of Eurasia from, right? That capital of the Semitic people on the Tigris and the Euphrates, right? Where Baghdad sits today, right? Where Ctesiphon was before it, right? Where was Seleucia was before it, right? That is the best place for a capital of the world, right on the Tigris and Euphrates. But hegemony has its own rules, right? These people who established the first true and global hegemony, the Assyrians, right? They conquered the Egyptians, they conquered the Babylonians, they conquered the Philistines, they conquered the Syrians, right? They conquered the Anatolians and the Hittites. They are ruling a chunk of the earth that is unassailable and probably could be used as a base to assert dominance over the rest of the earth, right? And they refer to themselves as king of the universe, king of the four corners, right? But hegemony cannot march, right? Once you are chief, you have to adopt the new set of rules, right? Attaining power and holding power require two different sets of rules, right? The British used to refer to it as the preeminent power, right? As top spot, as big chimp, there are better, higher rules you have to follow, right? It requires more patience. It requires more empathy, right? It requires not responding to threats from your inferiors, right? beat your chest at a small chimp or beat up on a small chimp, the rest of the tribe does not like that. They will look poorly upon that, as the whole world looks upon Donald Trump. I'd sign up to kill Southerners right now. Uh, you Confederates disgust me, right? I only hold brotherly love for Northern liberal Americans, and barely that at all at this point, right? I hate you Confederates. The Assyrians tried to march while they were hegemon. And the rest of the tribes around them, right? The other chimps, if personified, rose up and crushed them, right? Beat them to death and ate them. There is no Assyria anymore. There are Assyrians, but their claim is tenuous at best, and they are very few people in their own homeland, right? There are more Assyrians in America than there are in Assyria. So the Persians become hegemon, and the Persians are great hegemons, right? They understand the rules. They understand that kindness is rewarded at that level, and they in turn are rewarded with a 500-year stint as top spot, right? But they forgot the first half of the rules, which is that you also have to be big and tough. You have to train. You have to be constantly dominant. You don't have to be the most dominant, right? Macedon could have been more powerful, and the allies of Persia, the Sogdians and the Anatolians and the Medes, right? The cavalry contingents they drew upon could push them over the edge, but you can't sit on your laurels either. You have to continue to get stronger and bigger if you want to hold the top spot. But the Persians ruled with an open hand, right? The glad hand. And that's what enabled their longevity past their military prowess, right? That they understood the rules of the preeminent power, of hegemony. Greece takes it from them, as we were saying. Rome takes it from Greece, right? Rome rules with an iron fist. They, like Assyria, do not understand the rules of hegemony. They achieve it quickly and keep ruling like that. Everyone is to be burned and conquered and subjugated. Carthage destroyed for no reason, right? They can't take yes for an answer. They can't win gracefully. And so eventually they march. Hegemony cannot march, and they overextend themselves, right? And they're burned to the ground by Germans and Huns, and mostly Germans, right? And the hegemony transfers. Most people say back to the Arabs, right? From the 6 to the 900s, I would say. But this is a latency period as the Germans figure out statehood, right? They've beaten off a state, right? And now they're going to establish statehood themselves. They were only tribal before that. And so the hegemony passes back to the new Arab Empire, right? The Rashidun Caliphates, the rightly guided followers of the Prophet Muhammad. The Caliphate, though, runs into a problem right away, that they basically reassert the old Assyrian Empire, right? The old Persian Empire, and start trying to march, right? They run into the end of the world, basically, the steppe in the north and the African wastes to the south. There's nothing to expand into, and so they eventually crush themselves, right? And some peripheral people rises up and subjugates them. The caliph is not the leader of the Islamic world, but a puppet within 150, 200 years, right? Hegemony cannot march. So the hegemony shifts again, right? As these Turkic and Iranian peoples rise up and assert their will over the Arab majority of the Ummah, right? That the Arabs can no longer serve as hegemons. And so it shifts. Can't go back to Rome. Rome is destroyed, burned to the ground. What's in the West, right? The Germans, Charlemagne, right? Charlemagne splits everything up, doesn't really count. But Otto, a generation or two later, establishes the Holy Roman Empire that we know, right? That is the outline of the German peoples. The hegemony of Germania was the longest, right? From 900 until 1800, you could say. The Germans didn't even know that they were hegemons. They didn't understand the global reach of their power. They never tried to march, right? But everyone around them knew how powerful they were. The French, the Dutch, the Spanish, the English, all those people understood how tough and how big that chimp was, and they hated it, right? The Germans treated everyone fairly enough, right, under the Catholic rules, but they didn't really need to defer to decorum because they were so much more powerful than all their rivals in the area. But then the New World is discovered, right? And offense is not so costly anymore. And these powers expand into what they call terra nullius, right? Terra nullis, which is empty land. It's not empty of people, it's empty of states, right? A state is only that which can resist other states, which can be recognized by other states, according to the Treaty of Westphalia, right? And so they do expand into technically empty land. And I do not mean to downplay the suffering of the colonials, right? It's horrific if you read into it. The Spanish conquest of the Americas is probably one of the greatest crimes of all human history. But Spanish become hegemon all of a sudden. They try to march as hegemon, and they fail. Everyone rises up and crushes them. The British and the French duke it out for who gets to pick up the pieces, inherit the earth from this Spanish failure. And the English prevail, right? And the French fail. And again, it's because the French are hegemons over the English, right? The French view themselves as the mandarins of Europe, that there is no real state that can compete with the Kingdom of France, right? They don't see the Holy Roman Empire as a real state. They see the Archduchy of Austria as a real state, right? And that they're bigger than that. But they would never attack the Archduchy of Austria without expecting the other German states to go to their defense. And so it's hallucinatory, it's imaginary, right? So the English win, and they become the new hegemons. And the Germans don't figure it out until the mid 1800s, basically. There is no controlling mind, executive authority that can be convinced by an intelligentsia that is up to date and has all the modern info and tell them that we have to go to war against these upstarts, right, to preserve our spot in the hierarchy. And so by the time the Germans figure it out, it's too late, right? The English is the world language, it's the commerce language, it's the prestige language, right? And it's the military hegemon. And the British prove it by beating the Germans in a war, basically without the Americans, right? Without half the English Empire. But the task costs so much that the hegemony switches. The center of the English hegemony switches from London to Washington, D.C. And that this is the world we live in today, right? That the hegemony of the Anglo Empire, right, which split into a American Republic form and stayed a kingdom form in the island homeland, are intertwined, right? I call them the unholy alliance. They are one. They've always really been one, but they are closer now than they've ever been. But the point is, again, hegemony imposes new rules. You cannot march as hegemony, and so as hegemon. And so Trump is going to destroy America and probably the alliance system that props the rest of us up because he doesn't understand the rules. He doesn't understand that our interests are malleable, right? And perhaps my interest is seeing you become put down in the hierarchy because I hate you so much, you Confederate illiterates, right? That Trump's oafish, apish handling of a world empire and installation of illiterates in executive command, Lutnick and Loomer. Loomer is a creature, right? A subhuman creature. They're going to destroy it, right? They're going to destroy the world, basically, right? that the rest of the people that you the peoples that you envision as one person, right, for your ease of political imagination, are going to get tired of this shit. They're going to rise up and they're going to beat that guy to death. I don't care how tough one chimp is, it can't fight 20. So anyways, these are my thoughts on hegemony for today. Have a nice day. Hello, you've made it to the end of the video. Thank you. This channel has one mission: to prevent civilizational collapse associated with climate change, to prevent 100 million refugees by 2035, to stop 7 billion from starving to death by 2075. And we will do this through one main vehicle. We mean to unite the Anglosphere. We will do this by convincing the Commonwealth of His Majesty King Charles III to apply for statehood as one. And then with this new power, we will be able to negotiate in good faith with the rest of the world on how to tackle this crisis. Thank you and enjoy.